Chapter 1. The sharp echo of the warning sirens cut through the quiet hum of the research base. Captain Leila Armstrong, standing by the observation window, stiffened as the first explosion rocked the facility. Dust and debris spiraled in the air, swirling in the chaotic wake of an attack. Her hand gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white. For a brief moment, the familiar sense of dread gnawed at her, but she quickly shoved it aside. The time for fear was over. "Report," she barked, her voice steady despite the growing panic outside. "Rogue Thalln forces, ma'am. They're closing in fast," her second-in-command, Lieutenant Graham, shouted over the comms. His voice trembled slightly, but there was no room for uncertainty now. Leila's pulse quickened, but she exhaled slowly, pushing back the rush of adrenaline. The Thalln had been humanity's enemies for years. Their invasion of Earth had been devastating. But after years of war, a fragile peace had been brokered. Zorith had been one of the first steps toward reconciliation, a diplomatic outpost at the edge of the galaxy. Now, it seemed that peace was hanging by a thread. "Get the civilians to the escape pods. All non-essential personnel, evacuate immediately," Leila ordered, turning on her heel. Her mind was racing, plotting the next steps, but then a message came through that froze her in place. "I am Thal'korr Dren, leader of the Thalln forces. Surrender now, or we will burn your station to the ground. You have 10 minutes. Choose wisely." Her heart sank. Thal'korr Dren. The name alone was enough to send a cold shiver down anyone's spine. His reputation as a brutal tactician, known as the Unyielding, was legendary. He had led the Thalln military during the war, and his tactics had been ruthless. More than just a leader, he was a symbol of everything humanity had fought against. Leila quickly composed herself. "Lieutenant, give me a direct channel to him." Graham hesitated for a second, glancing at her, before punching in the commands. A crackling connection filled the room, and then the cold, unmistakable voice of Thal'korr filled the space. "Captain Armstrong," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I trust you remember me." Leila's jaw tightened, but she forced the words out. "I remember you, Thal'korr. What do you want?" "I want what your kind has taken from mine, power. You have no right to be here on Zorith. We Thalln are the rightful rulers of this system. You're nothing more than a pestilence, a distraction. Leave now, or face the consequences." The words were venom, but they weren't unexpected. Leila had known this day might come. The peace had always been tenuous, but hearing it from Thal'korr's lips felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than anything. Her hand clenched into a fist, but she kept her voice calm. "You can't just take Zorith back by force. The peace was established for a reason, Thal'korr. It was supposed to stop this kind of bloodshed." Thal'korr's laugh was cold, humorless. "Your peace is a lie, Captain, a lie that weakens both our people. I'm offering you a choice. Leave, or we burn everything you built. Your base, your people, all of it." "I won't surrender," Leila replied, her voice firm. She stood tall, tried to ignore the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. "I've seen too many lives lost to let that happen." For a moment, there was silence on the other end. Leila could almost hear him considering his next move. Then he spoke again, his tone icy. "You will regret this. You have 10 minutes. I will not ask again." The line went dead. Leila stared at the screen for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling in. Her mind raced. What was the next move? The Thalln weren't just attacking Zorith. They were attacking the future, the delicate peace that had taken years to build. She had no choice but to hold her ground. "Lieutenant, send a message to all personnel. Prepare for immediate defense. We have less than 10 minutes." She turned toward the door, her mind already planning her next steps. Her team would need every second they could muster. She needed to rally the troops, fortify the defenses, and buy enough time to figure out how to stop this madness before it escalated beyond repair. She couldn't let history repeat itself. Not again. Not on her watch. As she strode down the hall, a sense of purpose filled her. This wasn't just about a base. It wasn't even just about Zorith. This was about humanity's survival, about ensuring that they didn't lose everything they had fought for. If the Thalln could undo the peace now, There was nothing stopping them from bringing war back to Earth, to every human colony in the galaxy. Leila's communicator buzzed in her hand. She answered it without hesitation. "Captain, we've detected multiple enemy ships coming out of hyperspace," Lieutenant Graham reported. "They're already positioning around the base. It won't be long before they start the attack." "Understood. We'll need to hold them off as long as possible. Can we get any reinforcements from the nearest fleet?" Leila asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The nearest fleet is over 2 days away, Captain. We're on our own for now." She cursed under her breath. Alone. They were alone. But that was nothing new for humans, was it? The entire history of humanity was built on the backs of battles fought with the odds stacked high. The sound of boots pounding the corridor behind her pulled her from her thoughts. A group of soldiers, led by Lieutenant Graham, approached quickly. They all wore the same determined look on their faces. These were her people, her responsibility, and she wouldn't let them fall without a fight. Leila nodded at them. "Get to your stations. We're going to make sure they regret ever coming here." As the soldiers dispersed, she took a deep breath, her mind shifting to the immediate steps. Defend. Survive. Figure out a way to stop Thal'korr before this turned into a full-scale war. She had 10 minutes. 10 minutes to prepare for the battle that could change the course of humanity's future. It wasn't nearly enough time, but it would have to be. Chapter 2, the tension in the air was palpable. The deafening hum of machinery mixed with the hurried footsteps of soldiers scrambling to secure the base. Captain Leila Armstrong moved swiftly through the hallways, her boots clicking sharply against the metal floors. Her mind raced as her thoughts shifted from defense to something darker. The reality that the rogue Thalln faction had far more to gain than just vengeance. As she reached the central command room, Lieutenant Graham was already waiting. He didn't need to say anything. His anxious expression said it all. "We've secured all access points, Captain, but we're not out of the woods yet. We're getting reports of heavy movement around the perimeter." Leila nodded, her gaze hardening. "We'll hold them off, but I need you to patch me through to Thal'korr. Now." Graham hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console. "Are you sure about this, Captain? He won't negotiate. He's not here for peace." "I'm not negotiating," she snapped, her voice cold. "I'm trying to understand who's really behind this. If there's a rogue faction among them, we need to find out why they're attacking." With a deep breath, Graham complied, and the comm system buzzed to life. The static cleared, and once again, the chilling voice of Thal'korr Dren filled the room. "You have 5 minutes, Captain. I suggest you make them count," he said, his voice smooth but thick with menace. Leila didn't flinch. "I know about the rogue faction. I know you're not behind this attack." Thal'korr's silence was short-lived, a low growl in his voice when he finally spoke. "I have nothing to do with their actions. They are traitors to our cause." Leila's gaze narrowed, her mind working quickly. "Then why are they targeting us? Why now, after all these years of peace?" "I don't have time to explain myself," Thal'korr shot back. "If you want answers, Captain, you'll have to stop them yourself. I have more pressing matters to attend to. But know this, if you fail, humanity will pay the price." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving Leila with more questions than answers. She clenched her fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Thal'korr had essentially dismissed her plea, but the fact that he hadn't attacked outright was telling. It confirmed one thing. This wasn't just about humanity. It was about power within the Thalln ranks. Leila turned to Graham, her voice calm but determined. "There's more going on here than just an attack. This isn't a full-scale invasion. They want something else, and we need to find out what it is." Graham frowned. "But how do we find them? Their forces are everywhere." "Not everywhere," she countered, her mind already mapping out their next move. "The rogue faction needs to be dealt with quietly. If we attack them head-on, we risk escalating the conflict and alienating Thal'korr. We need to gather intel." She paused, thinking. "Prepare a small unit. We're going to infiltrate their lines. We'll move fast and stay off the radar." Graham raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Captain?" "I'm sure," she replied firmly. "We don't have a choice." Minutes later, Leila and a small team of soldiers slipped into the shadows of the base, moving with precision. They had a single goal: find the rogue faction's command center and figure out who was pulling the strings. Leila felt a gnawing unease, but there was no turning back now. As they moved deeper into the outskirts of the base, the atmosphere grew heavier. The usual hum of life on Zorith had been replaced by the ominous silence of an impending storm. The distant echoes of gunfire were now muffled, suggesting that the main force had already begun to engage. But this was not the fight Leila needed to win. They approached an abandoned supply depot. It was on the edge of the base, far enough from the front lines to go unnoticed, yet close enough to be strategically important. Leila signaled for the team to stop. She crouched behind a stack of crates, peering through a narrow gap toward the entrance. A figure emerged from the shadows, one of the rogue Thalln soldiers. Tall and imposing, he wore a dark cloak, his face obscured by a helmet. He spoke in low tones to someone unseen, his words carrying just enough for Leila to catch. "We strike tomorrow," the soldier murmured. "We have what we need. We'll trigger the war, whether the High Council agrees or not. It's time for the Thalln to reclaim their dominance." Leila's heart pounded in her chest. This was bigger than she'd anticipated. The rogue faction wasn't just attacking out of vengeance. They were plotting to ignite a galactic war, one that could unravel everything humanity and the Thalln had worked for. It wasn't just a battle for Zorith. It was a battle for control of the entire sector. As the soldier turned to leave, Leila motioned for her team to move. They followed him through the corridors of the depot, careful not to make sound. They reached a secure storage room, where a group of rogue Thalln soldiers was gathered, discussing their plans. "Zorith is just the beginning," one of them said, his voice filled with conviction. "The humans have spread their influence too far. It's time to crush them and remind the galaxy who the true rulers are." Leila exchanged a look with Graham. The rogue faction had already decided their course, and it was one of destruction. This wasn't just about peace, it was about power. "We can't let them succeed," Graham whispered, his tone urgent. "If they have a plan in motion, we're running out of time." Leila nodded. "We need to find their leader. Now." The group moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, avoiding detection as they made their way deeper into the base. After several tense minutes, they finally reached the command room. Inside, they found a small group of officers gathered around a holographic display, outlining their strategy. At the center of the table stood a figure Leila recognized, a high-ranking Thalln officer who had been an ardent supporter of the peace talks. But now his allegiance was clear. He wasn't here to preserve peace. He was here to break it. "We're going to strike at the heart of the human colonies," the officer said, pointing to a map of the galaxy. "We'll use Zorith as a staging point. Once we trigger the war, nothing will stop us." Leila's blood ran cold. The rogue faction wasn't just aiming for Zorith. They were planning a full-scale assault on human colonies across the galaxy. This was a much bigger threat than she'd ever imagined. She turned to Graham, her voice a low whisper. "We need to stop this now. If they launch their attack, it'll be a war like no other." They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of humanity. Without hesitation, Leila signaled her team to take action. The clock was ticking, and they had no time to waste. The battle for peace had just become the fight of their lives. Chapter 3. The air in the command room was thick with tension. Leila stood over a holographic display, her eyes scanning the map of Zorith and the surrounding sectors. The rogue faction was more organized than she'd anticipated, their movements precise, their intentions clear. They were pushing to escalate the conflict, aiming for nothing less than total war. It was only a matter of time before they struck. Her fingers hovered over the controls, her mind racing through every possible outcome. The consequences of failure were too great. But there was one thing she knew. There was only one person who could help her stop this madness before it spread beyond Zorith. Thal'korr Dren, the Thalln military leader who had once been her enemy. And now, despite everything, he was the only one with the power to put an end to the rogue faction's plans. Leila exhaled sharply, her decision made. She turned to Lieutenant Graham, who had been standing by the console, waiting for her command. "We need to contact Thal'korr," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Graham didn't hesitate. You think he'll cooperate after everything? We don't have a choice. If we don't act quickly, the rogue faction will set the galaxy on fire. Graham shot her a look, clearly unconvinced, but nodded in agreement. He punched in a command to open a direct line to Thal'korr. The screen flickered, and within seconds, the face of the Thalln commander appeared, his stern expression a mask of indifference. Captain Armstrong, Thal'korr greeted, his voice a low, almost gravelly growl. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I trust you've come to your senses. Leila ignored the barb, focusing on the matter at hand. I've learned everything I need to know. The rogue faction plans to trigger a full-scale war, not just on Zorith, but across the human colonies. They want to destroy everything we've worked for. Thal'korr's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. His expression remained as unreadable as ever. I need your help to stop them, Leila continued. I can't do this alone, and we can't afford to waste time. They're too organized, and they've already infiltrated our ranks. The silence stretched between them. Leila could almost hear the gears turning in Thal'korr's mind. Finally, he spoke. You asked for my help, Captain, but you must understand something. I do not ally with humans. You may have your precious peace treaty, but that does not mean I trust your kind. Leila's jaw tightened, but she pressed on. This isn't about trust. This is about survival. If you want to protect Zorith and your people, you need to help me stop this faction. If they succeed, both of our species will be consumed by this war. The galaxy will burn. Thal'korr studied her for a long moment, the weight of her words clearly sinking in. Then, with a begrudging nod, he finally spoke. Very well, but make no mistake, Captain. I do this because your survival is tied to mine. I am not here to be your ally. I am here to ensure the survival of the Thalln. Leila felt a flicker of relief, though it was fleeting. She knew Thal'korr's help was not a sign of friendship. It was a necessity, but for now that was enough. Agreed, Leila said, her tone resolute. We need to meet. I'll arrange a rendezvous. Thal'korr's cold gaze never wavered. I'll be waiting, Captain. Don't keep me waiting long. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Leila standing in front of the flickering screen. A sense of unease settled over her. Ally or not, they had no choice but to work together. She had just made a deal with the devil, but if it meant saving everything, she'd do it. The sun hung low over the alien landscape of Zorith, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. Leila's team was already assembling near the outskirts of the base, preparing for the meeting with Thal'korr. The air was thick with dust, the heat oppressive as they moved out into the wilderness. It was a stark contrast to the sterile walls of the research facility, but out here there was no safety net, no walls to hide behind. As they reached the designated location, a desolate plateau that overlooked a canyon, Leila spotted the unmistakable silhouette of Thal'korr's ship in the distance. His ship, the Unyielding, was a massive vessel, sleek and intimidating. It was a symbol of his power, of everything he had fought for and conquered. Leila took a steadying breath as her team gathered behind her. They had no backup, no reinforcements. This was it. If they failed here, the consequences would be catastrophic. As they approached the landing site, Thal'korr stepped out of his ship, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the barren landscape. He was flanked by several of his personal guards, each one towering over the humans around them. Captain Armstrong, Thal'korr greeted with his usual cold formality. I see you've brought your soldiers with you. How predictable. Leila ignored the jab, her focus solely on the mission. I'm here to stop the rogue faction, Thal'korr, and I'm not leaving without your help. Thal'korr's eyes glinted with amusement, but his face remained unreadable. You humans are always so persistent. Very well, I will listen to what you have to say. But make no mistake, this alliance will be short-lived. Leila's voice remained steady as she spoke, despite the weight of the situation. We don't have time for your pride, Thal'korr. They're planning a full-scale attack on the human colonies. If we don't stop them now, everything will burn. He studied her for a moment, and for the first time, Leila saw something flicker in his eyes, a hint of something resembling understanding or perhaps begrudging respect. "We are not so different, Captain," he said quietly, though his tone remained cold. "You fight for your people. I fight for mine. If our enemies succeed, we all lose." Leila nodded. "Exactly. We need to move fast. We can't afford to waste any more time." Thal'korr motioned for his guards to stand down. "Then let us proceed. Together." As they prepared to move out, Leila couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. She was walking alongside the very enemy who had once been the face of humanity's greatest threat. But now, in the face of a greater enemy, they were forced to work together. Thal'korr might have been ruthless, but at least he understood the stakes. That was enough for now. They weren't allies. Not yet. But for the first time in a long while, Leila allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this fragile partnership could save them all. Chapter for the air was thick with the hum of battle. The sounds of distant explosions echoed across the barren landscape, each one reverberating in the pit of Leila's stomach. She stood at the edge of the makeshift encampment, eyes scanning the horizon where the rogue Thalln faction's forces were gathering. The stakes had never been higher. They had to find the rogue leaders before they could trigger the war that would shatter the fragile peace that humanity had fought so hard to achieve. Leila's team was ready. They were a handful of elite soldiers, all veterans of past conflicts, but even they couldn't shake the tension in the air. Their mission was simple: infiltrate the rogue faction's stronghold, find their leader, and neutralize the threat before it could escalate any further. But simple missions rarely stayed simple in times like these. Beside her, Thal'korr Dren stood like a statue. His black armor gleamed in the dim light of the planet's twin suns, his towering frame a testament to the sheer power he commanded. He had said little since their last conversation, but Leila could feel the unspoken weight between them. He was a warrior, driven by a code of honor that was both alien and familiar, a man who had once led an invasion of Earth and now stood alongside her as a reluctant ally. "Are we ready?" Leila asked, turning to him. Thal'korr's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "We move when I say so. The rogue faction is not to be underestimated. They will strike first, and they will not hesitate to kill." Leila nodded, her mind racing through the strategy they had developed. They had no choice but to go in quietly, using the element of surprise to their advantage. If they didn't, the fight would be lost before it even began. "Understood, but we need to get in and out without being detected. We don't have the luxury of a prolonged engagement." Thal'korr gave her a sharp glance, his dark eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You speak as if I don't know the meaning of subtlety, Captain. Trust me when I say I will not fail." Leila didn't respond. There was no need for words anymore. The tension had already been established, and now they both understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about stopping the rogue faction. It was about proving to each other that they could work together, even in the face of impossible odds. As they approached the rogue faction's hideout, the landscape grew darker, more foreboding. The ground beneath their boots was uneven, cracked from years of tectonic activity, the jagged peaks of distant mountains cutting through the thick atmosphere. The only sounds were the wind and the distant murmur of the enemy camp. Leila signaled for her team to halt. They crouched low, the darkness providing them cover as they neared the enemy stronghold. Thal'korr moved like a shadow, his every step silent and deliberate, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Despite their differences, Leila couldn't help but admire his efficiency. He was a born warrior, his senses sharp, his mind always 2 steps ahead. "Do you think he'll fight back?" Leila asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thal'korr's eyes remained focused ahead. "Of course. They are not soldiers, they are fanatics. And fanatics are the most dangerous kind." Leila exhaled slowly, her mind briefly wandering back to the moment when she had first met Thal'korr. He had been ruthless, unyielding, the embodiment of everything humanity had fought against. But now, in the face of a shared enemy, something had changed. Perhaps it was the weight of their history, the bond forged in the crucible of conflict, or perhaps it was simply necessity. Whatever it was undeniable that their relationship had shifted. But even as she tried to make sense of it, she knew there was no time for contemplation. The rogue faction was close, and they needed to act fast. Thal'korr held up a fist, signaling the team to stop. Ahead of them, a guard stood watch at the entrance to the stronghold, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Leila motioned for one of her soldiers to take the guard out quietly. Within seconds, the man was down, his body disappearing into the shadows without a sound. Thal'korr stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the entrance. "We move," he said, his voice a low growl. "And we move fast." They entered the stronghold, their movements fluid and practiced. The interior was a labyrinth of metal and stone, dimly lit by flickering lights. The rogue faction had clearly made this place their own, but it had an air of hastily constructed chaos. The walls were adorned with strange alien symbols, and the air was thick with the smell of something burning. They moved deeper into the stronghold, their footsteps echoing through the hallways. Leila's heart beat faster with each step, the tension building as they approached their target. They had no idea how many more soldiers the rogue faction had hidden in the shadows, but they couldn't afford to underestimate them. As they reached the central command room, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the leader of the rogue faction stood with his back to them, staring out a large viewport that overlooked the planet below. His figure was tall and imposing, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned slowly as they entered, his eyes cold and calculating. "So, the humans come to play hero," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "How predictable." Leila stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the rogue leader. "We're here to stop you," she said, her voice unwavering. "Your actions will lead to the destruction of everything we've worked for. Your people will never trust you again once this war starts." The rogue leader chuckled darkly, his smile thin and cruel. "You think you can stop this, Captain? You think your fragile peace will save you? The Thalln have always been superior, and now we will take back what is ours." Thal'korr stepped forward, his presence like a physical force. "You speak of superiority, but you are nothing more than a traitor to your own people. You have no honor. You will fall." The rogue leader's smile faltered, replaced by a look of fury. "You think I care about honor? I care about power, and the power I seek will burn you both." Leila stepped between them, her voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't about power. This is about survival. We can still stop this, but only if you surrender now. You can walk away from this, or you can die with the rest of them." For a long moment, the rogue leader said nothing. The room was filled with the heavy silence of unspoken choices. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You may have won today, Captain, but the war is coming, and when it does, you will be the first to fall." As the rogue leader was restrained and taken into custody, Leila felt a strange sense of relief. The battle wasn't over, but they had taken the first step in ensuring that peace would prevail. Thal'korr turned to her, his expression unreadable. "This is not the end, Captain. It is only the beginning." Leila nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like they had a chance. Together, they could stop the war. Together, they could build a future. And that, for now, was enough. Chapter 5: The Future of Peace. The winds on Zorith had shifted. It was a strange feeling, as if the entire planet had exhaled a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. After weeks of uncertainty, the rogue faction's defeat marked a pivotal moment, one that offered a fragile hope for peace. But Leila Armstrong knew better than to trust and hope alone. Peace was not an easy thing to preserve. It was a constant battle, one that required vigilance, compromise, and, sometimes, unexpected alliances. Leila stood before the large windows of the command center, her gaze locked on the horizon. The twin suns were dipping below the jagged mountains, casting long, orange shadows over the planet's rugged terrain. For a fleeting moment, Zorith looked peaceful. But deep down, she knew it was a fleeting illusion. Peace had always been fragile. It always would be. Behind her, the doors opened with a soft hiss. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Thal'korr Dren, his presence as imposing as ever, entered the room, his footsteps heavy on the metal floor. The Thalln commander had not changed. His armor still gleamed with that same dark, intimidating luster. But something was different in the way he held himself, perhaps a shift in his demeanor, or maybe the weight of the decision that lay ahead. They both knew that this was only the beginning. "We've done it," Leila said quietly, still staring out the window. "The rogue faction is in custody, and we've averted a war. For now." Thal'korr's voice came from behind her, low and deliberate. "For now," he echoed. "You speak as if the battle is over, Captain. You and I both know that this was merely one skirmish in a much larger conflict." Leila turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his with a quiet intensity. "I don't underestimate the challenges ahead. But if we can't even handle the internal threats within our own ranks, how are we supposed to build something better? A future that doesn't just rely on military might?" Thal'korr didn't respond immediately. He simply regarded her with that unreadable expression, his sharp eyes flicking across her face. His silence stretched, thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, he stepped forward, closer than she expected. "You're asking for something that is not easily given," he said. "The Thalln are warriors. We do not settle our disputes with diplomacy or compromise. We fight, we conquer, and we survive." Leila met his gaze without flinching. "I know that. I've seen it. But we're not the same as we were. Neither of us is. The galaxy has changed, and so must we." Thal'korr's eyes softened, just for a fraction of a moment, before that hardened edge returned. "You asked me to change my ways, Captain. Do you even understand what that means? The Thalln have fought for generations to maintain our strength, our place in the galaxy. We are not simply going to lay down our weapons." Leila sighed, rubbing her temples, as though she could somehow erase the weight of the conversation. "You're right. You're not going to lay down your weapons, and neither are we. But there's a difference between using your strength to protect and using it to destroy. It's a lesson that's been learned the hard way." There was a long silence between them. Outside, the last traces of sunlight faded, and the room was cast in shadow. But inside, something seemed to shift. Thal'korr was a man used to war, but now, for the first time, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a recognition that perhaps there was another way forward. "You think this peace is real, don't you?" Thal'korr finally asked, his voice quiet, almost contemplative. "I think it's worth fighting for," Leila said firmly. Thal'korr's lips curled slightly, a gesture that might have been a smile if it weren't so fleeting. He crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze shifting back to the horizon. "I have fought for many things in my life, Captain. For honor, for pride, for the survival of my people. But you're right about one thing. This peace, it will require more than just victory in battle." Leila stepped forward, her heart pounding as she felt the magnitude of the moment settling between them. "You're saying you'll help?" Thal'korr looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw something more than cold calculation in his eyes. There was resolve, yes, but also a trace of something deeper, something almost human. "I'm saying that we will both have to fight in different ways. We will have to use our strength to build, not just destroy. The future you speak of, this future of peace, it is not one that I can give to you. It is one that we must build together." Leila held his gaze, the weight of his words settling into her bones. It was not an agreement, not yet, but it was something more than she had ever expected from him. A small but crucial step forward. "That's all I can ask," she replied softly. "Together, then." Before Thal'korr could answer, the door to the command center opened again, and Graham stepped in, his face serious. "Captain, we've received word from the Human Council. They're calling for an emergency meeting. They want to discuss the next steps now that the rogue faction is neutralized." Leila's gaze flickered toward Graham, then back to Thal'korr. There was still so much to be done. This was just the beginning. "Prepare the team," Leila said, her voice resolute. "We're going to need all the support we can get if we're going to make this work. I'll speak to the council. We need their backing for this peace effort to have any hope of lasting." Thal'korr nodded once, a silent understanding passing between them. "I will be ready," he said. As Leila turned to leave, she paused for a moment, glancing back at the towering figure of Thal'korr. There was a flicker of something in his posture now, a slight shift, an unspoken change in how he stood. Together. It was a small word, a simple one. But in that moment, Leila knew that it was the only way forward. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she felt, for the first time in years, a cautious sense of hope. The galaxy had given them a chance at peace, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was a chance they could both honor. The emergency council meeting was a blur of voices and conflicting opinions. The representatives from Earth, the other human colonies, and the Thalln, along with various other factions, argued passionately about the path forward. Leila sat at the center, her mind focused and her resolve unshaken. The rogue faction's defeat had been a significant victory, but the real battle was just beginning. She would need every ounce of patience, strength, and diplomacy she had. But in that moment, as she looked across the room at Thal'korr, standing tall beside her, she realized something important. They were not enemies anymore. And with that realization, the fragile hope for peace felt just a little more solid. It was a long road, but together they would walk it.